It's nothing new for people in the early part of their careers to have to grind it out to pay the bills. But the way younger people do that today, given the gig economy, social media, and now the pandemic, has a new way of being all consuming all the time. With us now to explain the pressures and why there's growing pushback, all in Ontario's capital city, writer, broadcaster, and columnist Emil Niazi, Vas Bednar, Executive Director of McMaster University's Master of Public Policy in Digital Society program, and Shanik Tena, creative producer of Recess, a Toronto-based collective and creative community. Welcome to you all.
Hi.
Thank you.
So I'm going to read a quick definition of what Joe Ryle, the director of the 4-Day Week campaign, defines hustle culture, and then I want to get your ideas on your own definitions. So he defines it this way. Hustle culture is about work dominating your time in such an unnatural way that we have no time to live our lives. So what is your understanding of the idea of hustling? Shanik, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so for me, hustle culture, because I'm based in more of a creative world, hustle culture to me, it just sort of reinforces the idea that your attention belongs to profit instead of pleasure. For me, a really important part of what we do here is to allow people to explore new things just out of the simplicity of curiosity and joy. So once you start adding factors like money to that, it sort of spoils the joy of things. There is a place for that, but I think that once you start adding, more things based around money after your 9 to 5, and you're adding it to your hobbies, it really is stressful.
Emil, what about you? How would you define hustle culture?
Yeah, I think beyond just the idea that work dominates your life, I think it's this sense that grinding and commodifying every single aspect of your kind of day is necessary to kind of be part of your identity. I think that millennials and Gen Zs, we've kind of turned hustle culture into a big part of who we are and how we identify as a generation. And I think that leads to burnout. And I think that when I think of hustle culture, I think of someone turning all of their kind of side projects and hobbies into a monetization stream. I think of someone who's overscheduled themselves, overscheduled their kids, and basically just living from meeting to meeting and Zoom to Zoom.
And Vas, what about you?
So I'm really glad Sean Nick brought up pleasure principle, and that Emil pointed to monetizing kind of side projects. To my mind, one of the best captures of this hustle culture is performative workaholism, which I probably sort of said incorrectly, but I wonder if there's like a bit of a typology here in terms of where do side hustles fit in that? Where do gigs fit in that, in terms of kind of floating upwards and pushing people to kind of constantly be engaged in activities that are either career related or performative to a certain extent in terms of participating in digital communities that are in some way related to their career, their persona. Again, not that it's a performance of work and that it's not productive, but that there's a pressure to constantly be engaged beyond the 9 to 5.
It's so interesting, all of your definitions, because a while back, Kim Kardashian had the video went viral. She said that nobody wants to work anymore. She's since kind of walked it back, but it just seems as if there's like a disconnect of what's happening for us normals versus the people who, make a lot of money. And Emil, you wrote a piece titled "Losing My Ambitions" for The Cut, an online publication. How has your outlook on career shifted during the pandemic and since you became a parent?
Yeah, I think it's been a kind of a gradual change for me, but certainly both, motherhood and parenthood coupled with the pandemic really triggered this shift in my thinking about work. And I wrote in the piece about how growing up as an immigrant, I knew that ambition and work was my pathway out of poverty. And so it came to define a big part of who I was and how I saw myself. And certainly, I was always told if you turn your passions into a job, you'll never work a day in your life. And that was kind of the narrative around work when I was coming of age. And so I put a lot of pressure on myself to not just make living a means to an end, but make it a huge part of who I was and how I identified. And once I realized that my time was finite, and that's something that was really crystallized for me becoming a parent, I started to think about the ways in which I was spending that time and what it was doing to me and how it was affecting my outlook on life. And I realized that I was feeling depressed. I was feeling frustrated. I never felt like my time was my own. And then once the pandemic hit and everything unraveled, I finally saw this as an opportunity for me to completely relitigate my approach to my ambition, my approach to what work means in my life. And I saw it as kind of an escape button, and I smashed that button.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. Vas, Emil said that my time is not my own. And I think during the pandemic, we were appreciative of the opportunity to work from home because a lot of people did lose their jobs. And if you had the opportunity to work from home, it was as if you had an additional privilege. But it felt like work bled into everything else, right? And if you had a few hustle going on, I'm thinking that the burnout must have been more than that, right? And I think you can experience burnout both from a stable corporate job or if you have multiple side hustles. Who tends to be more vulnerable to burnout?
So I think you earlier pointed to younger people. How is hustle culture, affecting younger people in particular? I think that's the generation that sees hustle culture kind of advertised to them, used to commodify products, to glorify waking up at 5 a.m. or drinking an energy drink, etc. So I would suggest that young people starting to carve out their career are most vulnerable to this pressure that sort of points to busyness as a source of prestige, right? Or conflates busyness and a full calendar to something that will be remunerated later, that there's, a pot of gold at the end of this hustle culture rainbow, when really what it tends to be doing is kind of squeezing more out of everyone for, no additional wage growth. And post-pandemic, I think there's a lot of pandemic associated kind of stress related to work that might be pressuring people to put in those extra hours, be they for their core job or for something that they're chasing personally.
And Shanik, Emil mentioned earlier that, the dream is to find a job where it doesn't feel like work, right? But we hardly talk about fun. You're part of a collective that uses workshops and events that allows people to connect with their creativity and with each other. What's the importance of play?
Yeah, so play is really important to me specifically as well, because I would be someone who would turn a lot of my creative endeavors into work. I would take on jobs, but really I just wanted to explore my curiosity. So play, what I find when people come, what's so important to them is just having a chance to expand their minds, to allow them to explore and see new ideas in a new light, just to be more engaged. And play, it really just broadens possibilities. It helps you make connections with things you wouldn't have made. You'll be able to come to a workshop and just meet someone or try something that you never would have thought of doing, like creative writing or kombucha making, things like that. um, it's just so important to let people come into a space and be free and not have to worry about using that creative endeavor to think about, like, how's this going to make me $1 million, or how am I going to be huge on social media. We just want a place where it's very low barrier and you just try something new.
And Emil, social media and pop culture seem to be playing a greater role in our lives. We've seen trends like hashtag girl boss, and they're pushing the message, especially to women, that you have to work harder to make things happen. Is it that simple?
No, it's not that simple at all. And in fact, I think that there's a huge pushback now against that kind of toxic girl boss mentality, because the fact is that, women in particular have been doing it all, doing it for less. We know that we, are underpaid and we're underrepresented in all levels of management. And, we've seen what a dramatic decrease in women in the workforce happened when the pandemic shifted the responsibility of care, and suddenly it was clear who's been kind of holding up society, basically, is women and working moms. And so I think that, the girl boss mentality posits that if you just hustle harder and work harder, that somehow you will achieve this level of independence. Because I think it's all about pushing, being the CEO, the entrepreneur, the person who's in charge, because somehow that will give you back your time. And I think that's so fallacious, because we know that those people work even harder and have less breaks. And so I think you just end up in this trap, where there's no out, there's no opportunity for you to actually live your life. You're just in constant search of capital, and it's led by consumption, and it's sort of being sold to you, and it's being sold to you so that you can buy other products in service of this ethos.
I want to look at some numbers, and Vas, I want to come to you afterwards. And this is from the Financial Post. The article states millennials are more likely to quit their job if they can't maintain control over where and when they work. Canadians between 18 and 34 years old were much more likely to choose a 30-hour work week than their older colleagues. And over 10,000 new businesses opened across Canada, which exceeded the number of businesses closing between July 2020 and March 2021, contributing to a spike in side hustles. So Vas, that article states that millennials are more likely to choose a 30-hour work week. What a dream. What role does age and generation play when we talk about hustle culture and burnout?
So, a couple of things there. One, if young people are exerting a little bit more voice and autonomy in terms of how they get their work done, I think that's fundamentally a great thing. The second aspect that I think is worth talking about, and I'll bring it back to Kim Kardashian because you mentioned her earlier, is the kind of brand building that young people are implicitly, I think, pushed towards that contributes to hustle culture, right? When Kim says people don't just want to work, she's not talking about going to a factory or showing up to your 9 to 5, right? She's somebody who's capitalized on a persona, on a brand, on something that can be licensed, on something that's maintained, that there's a lot of imagery associated with that. So if people are also choosing a slightly shorter work week or taking control over their time so that they can engage in, as Sean Nick was saying, more of the pleasure principle, joyful hobbies, things that are going to make them more creative, satisfied, interesting people, or just spending time with their friends, their family, themselves, then that's also, I think, fundamentally a good thing for productivity overall, right? We are not going to become a more productive country just because everybody's adding 5 to 10 hours to their work week. In fact, the literature shows us that people get less done when they're working longer. So why don't we do more to listen to that?
And Shanik, social media, I mentioned social media before, and it's actually allowing people to kind of circumvent, the gatekeepers, right? Every time on Instagram, if I see a friend has posted a sponsored ad, I'm like, love. I go through them and I love all of them because it's really great to see people be able to make money off their side hustles. But what's the difference between that and engaging in activities just for pleasure?
Yeah, so I always hear from people who think they need some specific creative mind or to consider themselves creative. Like even when I post a video or design or music or things like that, they'll ask like, "How did you learn this?" Like I could never find the time. And they define a creative person as someone who does creative work for a living. So that might be something like a sponsored post or always finishing like a perfect package of a product. And social media and hustle culture, it just has us believe creativity comes in the form of a beautiful finished package. And I think that not being intimidated by creativity helps people provide confidence in approaching problems at home, problems at work, just your own endeavors and curiosity, no matter what it is. And I think if people are just given the chance to try something new and approach it more as play than hustle, and they'll find themselves with a creative mindset and more of a connection to a community with shared interests.
I think growing up, there was hardly any musician who would even sell their music to like a brand because you were considered a sellout. So in this environment, Shanik, how can you maintain your creativity in your side hustle without looking like a sellout?
I think it's just being authentic. I think even if there is a place, if as well, if you wanted to do a sponsored post or anything like that, I don't think anyone will look down upon you as long as you're authentic to yourself and you're being your true self. If you're showing that you're exploring your own curiosity, that will always beat any type of thinking around selling out.
Emil, I want to read an excerpt from your article. You write, we want to work, we have to, but many of us are no longer willing to trade our well being for a chance to claw at the decaying American dream. There's a renewed focus on relationships, community, and the slow beat of life outside the gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss ethos. So, Emil, how do we resist this mentality and rebuild our sense of well being while still making our ends meet?
Well, I think, what how I put it for myself is really detaching my sense of identity with what I do and my idea of ambition. It's reframing my priorities. So putting more emphasis on building community, on not just my role in that community, but how I also serve that community. Whether it's mutual aid, whether it's just it can be done on such a small, intimate kind of neighbor to neighbor grassroots level. I think about disconnecting when I'm with my friends and family. I'm certainly one of the worst as far as like having that constant screen in front of me. But can I put that away and really when I'm concentrating on those things outside of that, can I give of my full self? And I think it's helped me just reframe my choices and reframe how I look at work as a function of living, as opposed to who I am and what I mean to the world, and how the world sees me. And that's really difficult because, like I said, growing up I'm a millennial, and work was always sold to me as like the kind of main focus, a way for me to exert control and power in the world. And increasingly, I think having lived through, multiple generation defining recessions and student debt and all of these things that have just opened my eyes, and I think a lot of my peers' eyes, to the reality of what that means, and how, as much as we have tried to achieve those things, whether it's home ownership or climbing the corporate ladder, that increasingly they're out of reach. And so how can we redefine the things that are important to us? And I think that I'm starting with letting go of what I consider to be ambition.
So how would you, because I think there was a time where women were kind of embarrassed to be ambitious. It was looked at as if it was a bad thing. When you're making these trade-offs, because I think that's what they are, right? Emil, do you worry that maybe this is going to put you back a little bit? Because the reality is that we do live in a world where, everything is costing more. Jobs are not as, very few people have pensions now. Do you worry about that?
I worry about it all the time. I have kids. I live in Toronto, so I live in one of the most expensive cities in the world, let alone the country. And I'm not naive to what it means to be able to, feed my family and house my family and house myself. And there's no kind of nirvana in which I exist where those are not part of my reality. And I also still, I think, reframing ambition doesn't mean that I don't work hard and that I don't still value work. It just means that it's not going to take over my life in the way that it has. And of course I worry. I mean, I'm a woman, and I know, like, one of the things that spurred this article was, I read a stat that said women reach their peak earning years, in their early to mid 40s. That's not far off from me. And the idea that this is the most that I'll be making after everything that I've put into building my career is very concerning. It gives me a lot of anxiety. But what am I going to do with that worry, and how am I going to use it to build the kind of life that I want? Because I know that the market's not going to respond to my needs and my anxieties. I'm going to have to figure out how I make ends meet, but still maintain my sense of time and my sense of self within all of that.
And Vas, thinking of what Emil said, like, having these trade offs, I think before in previous generations, the payoff was the pension. You work, you put in all these hours, you were dedicated to your job because at the end of it, you receive this nice pension, right? But studies suggest that gig economy and telework are contributing factors to overworking. In your view, how has the pandemic accelerated these trends?
Well, I think already before the pandemic, we saw more people in more precarious work, right? At that time, the average Canadian had about 7 to 9 job shifts, if not, total career changes over the course of their lifetime, which is very different than starting in one role and growing with a company and kind of, again, having a cushion at the end of it. So one, I think people have been jarred and potentially traumatized, and the world is very volatile right now. And in this period of inflation, of course, I can see how it nudges people to working more, doing extra as a way to maybe comfort themselves or feel like you're insulating yourself or making yourself a more competitive candidate for something in the future. But what I love about what Emil's pointing to is, what is ambition? What is it that we covet for ourselves and for each other? And I think in this hyper digital age, we've somehow allowed our career goals to be reshaped, where the person is at the center of it, right? We're very tightly connected to our work in terms of how we present ourselves. And we're maybe losing that sense of what it means to be a community, what it means to be a collective, what it means to be playful, what it means to rest, and what that does for who we are as people going forward. So maybe we also have to remake and kind of grab onto this digital dream and continue to call it out for its falsehoods and the mythology that it's sort of captivating people with.
Shanik, I saw you nodding.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we get sucked up into what happens on our phones, on our screens all day, that it's very hard to us to see outside of that right now because of how these digital technologies almost control us. It's hard for us to connect with communities, and for me, it just matters so much to connect and find that community because I found joy in connecting with that community, joy in really pursuing my hobbies. I grew up moving around a lot, so just finding a community that I share similar interests with and can share thoughts and concerns, and I can help out. Like it really means a lot to me. So again, like it's just so important to get beyond the screen, to not get so caught up in the illusion of hustle culture, and to really just find those people around you.
That's interesting, the word you used, illusion. So you're saying hustle culture is not real?
I think hustle culture is a real thing, but I think that when we see, like a sponsored post, we see our friend posting sponsored posts, or we see all these beautiful packages on Instagram and things like that takes a lot of work. It's not the easiest thing. So when you're being sold this dream that everything is easy and you can just go make some YouTube videos or create some photos and you'll automatically be making money, there's a lot more to it. It's a lot of sacrifice, it's a lot of work, it takes up a lot of time as well. So I think for a lot of people that's not a life that they actually do want to be living. But for those that do it, there's positivity to it as well, but I think you really need to hone into what brings you joy.
I wanted to follow up with you, Shanik. We tend to associate creative and freelancing work with freedom, but there's also a lot of uncertainty. So, being a creator yourself, how do you navigate and balance these different aspects?
I think there is a lot of uncertainty, but I think the biggest thing for me, at least, was to really find a community within that freelance community that I could lean on.
Mhm.
Even at the space that I'm at, the recess space, we have a lot of photographers that come through here. We have a lot of people who are just starting to learn. We have a lot of experienced people that come through. So really, I think for me, it was using digital platforms like Instagram as more of a tool to actually connect with people that I can meet with in real life and share concerns or share problems that we might be having, and really share knowledge between each other.
And Vas, we've been hearing communities advocating for 4-day work weeks. Do you think that hustle culture will become less prominent in the future, or will it actually persist even more?
I think it's going to persist even more. Sorry to be a pessimist. I think that hustle culture kind of capitalizes on maybe the myth of meritocracy that we have, right? If you keep working hard, if you put in these extra hours, again, there's some kind of guaranteed reward. And when I think about the messages we give young people as they start to carve out their careers, they're very much aligned with this hustle culture, but they're also, we give people very coded messages, right? That it matters who you know, that networks matter, that you should randomly and sporadically message people on LinkedIn, and this will kind of ensure you have a good career. And no disrespect to people that meet people online, that's a great way to reach out and make new connections. But I think if you dig into that, you start to realize that we're telling people who you know matters, right? And why should it matter that much? And do we have equitable hiring processes, or are we really just looking for referrals and hiring through word of mouth and cutting corners because we don't have time? I don't know if this actually truly relates to hustle culture, but this is certainly what's coming top of mind to me as I'm listening to my colleagues on this panel. I do think it will get a little bit worse, but I think we have some interesting policy tools, both formal public policy and also company policy, that can help to curb it. But if we don't have leadership, if we don't have people who truly model this, then people will never get the message that it's okay to actually not work that 5th day in a 4-day work week.
And
That's
Emil,
my thoughts.
thanks, Max. Great thoughts as always. Emil, we have 1 minute left. I think one of the things that we've seen during the pandemic is that this relationship between employees and employers has kind of shifted. Do you think that now it's shifted in a sense to allow employees to know that they actually have more power than they realized before?
I do think that there is a slow shift in the relationship, the power balance between employers and employees. I think, we haven't really seen that kind of great resignation of people quitting en masse here in Canada as you see in the US. But what you do see are employees sort of relitigating their relationship to their employer, relitigating what they need and value from work. So whether it's remote work or hybrid work or opportunities to have more flexible work schedules, you see employers kind of getting ahead of that and offering, looking to offer employees better benefits packages that are more reflective of what employees need now. I think there's certainly a change in the dynamic. And I know that, and that's, I agree with you that things are certainly not going to change radically in the near future. But I'll just say that the response to my article, the amount of people that have shared it and have reached out to me, and this is across the board. This is people who are CEOs. I'm talking about, like, senior managers who have reached out to me and said, you have completely echoed everything that I've been thinking and feeling, and so are my friends. So while I'm also usually a cynic in these moments, I see a shift. I see a change.
Good. Yeah. I loved your article, and I feel hopeful too. And thank you for writing it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of your insights. I really enjoyed this conversation. At the beginning, when we were chatting, I mentioned that whenever I think of hustle culture, I think of the Cardinal official video, Hustling. So if anybody wants to look at it, it kind of gives you the impression of what hustle culture is like. You're always moving fast and quickly because you're in competition. And so lots to think about tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.